Hi, I'm Stephanie Earp, and this is my very first knitting podcast. It's funny when I mention to people that I'm thinking about doing a knitting podcast, they send me links to like audio recording stuff. But in the knitting world, a podcast is actually a vlog or a YouTube. Anyway, it's a video, so here I am making my very first knitting video, and my idea is sort of like to just talk a little bit about my design process. I'm a knitwear designer. I design knitting patterns. Also talk about what I'm knitting and hopefully make a few dumb jokes. So welcome. As I said, my name is Stephanie Earp, and you can find my designs on Ravelry under Stephanie Earp. My Ravelry username is One and Only Steph, and I have a website at stephanieearp.com, and I'll flash all this stuff up on the screen when I figure out how to use video editing software. It's going to be great. I love a learning curve, right? I mean, learning new skills. It's good. Anyway, so this episode I am going to start by talking a little bit about a design I released in February called the Fourscore sweater, or just Fourscore. That's how you would look for it on Ravelry. And it's funny because I used to design quite a bit. I used to submit to magazines. I have been and release a few things of my own as well. But I kind of got out of it because it didn't pay very well. And also, I found myself always trying to design to the magazine submission calls, which weren't, that's cool. Like, it's nice to have some inspiration and a place to start from. But in the end, it didn't feel always like I was doing what I wanted to, and by the time I was actually like sending this thing in the mail to the magazine to get shot, it's like it wasn't my size, it wasn't my colors, and it didn't necessarily look a lot like what I had originally sent them as a sketch. And I also had a little bit of imposter syndrome going on too, where I didn't really feel like I had enough experience. So here's the story of how I got back into it. I am trying to write a book. In fact, I shouldn't say that. I wrote a book. I spent basically a year after my maternity leave writing a novel, and sent it off to go to different agents to see if anybody wanted to represent me. So there's like a long period there where I was doing a lot of sitting around hitting refresh on my email like 90 times a day and obsessing about Twitter and basically slowly losing my mind. So I was like, okay, I've got this time. I should be doing something with it. What do I know how to do? Well, I know how to design knitting patterns. So I'm like, okay, I start like looking at what magazines are looking for new designs, and I got some ideas. But one of the things I really needed was some stitch markers. So off I go marching to the local yarn store in Montreal, which was new to me at the time. I had just moved. And it's called Espace Tricot, and it's on Monkland Avenue in Montreal. So I go in, I'm like doodling around looking for stitch markers. I had been in once before. I bought yarn for a sweater that I made there. But this time, being a lonely writer type who hadn't talked to a real person in a really long time other than my husband and child, I just started chatting away with the staff in the store, and the next thing you know, I realize I'm talking to Lisa, who is one of the owners, and telling her what I'm doing with my life. That, like, I've got this book, I don't know what's happening, I might submit some designs. And I can see, like, the mental gears going in her head, and finally she goes, do you maybe want to work here? I was like, I don't know. I didn't come in looking for a job, but I'll certainly think about it. I'll bring you my resume. And she's like, no, I just, like, maybe we could just quickly do an interview. I'm like, yeah, sure. When would you like to do that? He's like, well, how about right now? So, like, we seriously, like, just pull up two stools in, like, one of the sort of nooks and crannies in the store and do an interview. And the next thing I know, I'm being offered a job. So, I just thought, say yes, do it. I make jokes about it, but to give you the honest truth, it was a little bit of a lonely life then. I didn't know a lot of people in the city, and when you're an adult and you're not in school, it's super hard to make friends. So I was like, I'm gonna do it. So I took on 2 days a week and started working at the store, and boy, am I glad I did. Like, I could get like sort of sincere and weepy about how happy I am that I took this job, because I've met my people, like my tribe, and one of the things that happened is that I got way back into design and started doing it indie. So really, like, the first real design I did was the Fourscore sweater, and it definitely came directly from this experience of working at an LYS, a local yarn store, which I had never done before, and talking to customers. So, like, newer knitters would come into the store, I say newer, like they had made their bones, they made some scarves, maybe they made a cowl, and they had maybe learned a little bit of cabling or some increases and decreases, and they're like, I put in my time. I am ready to make a sweater. Can you recommend a pattern for me? So of course, like we go into Ravelry and look at stuff, and so often what I'd be pulling out, I'd be like, okay, I found something for you. This is an easy first time sweater. Here we go. And so we'd have super fun, like finding yarn, no problem. And then we'd get into the notions, right? And they'd be like, okay, so, you're going to need a 24-inch circular and a 32-inch circular. And you're going to need some DPNs or some longer circulars or something to knit your small circumference sleeves. So let's go over to the needle section and like load you up with all the needles you need. And then, like, by the way, there's neck shaping. So you're going to need to like learn how to cast off and pick up stitches and do that, and like reverse shapings from the front, from this, the right front and the shoulder and the left shoulder. Oh, and by the way, like, have you ever heard of short rows? Because like sometimes they use those to like shape the back neck. So by the end of this conversation, like the look on this newer knitter's face is, it's like sort of like when you go to a party and you mention that you like a band, like you've heard the song on the radio and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of like that song. And someone's like, well, let me tell you about their early catalog. And have you ever heard this song? And oh, you totally need to get into this person's mixtape. And you're like, whoa, like back away. I'm not sure I'm ready to go this deep. So seeing that look on these knitters' faces, they're like, I'm sure there's patterns out there that do answer this, but I didn't know which ones they were. So I'm like clicking away in my head of like, what would a great first sweater pattern have? Like really allowed somebody who just done cowls or maybe some scarves to like get in there and make themselves a sweater that they actually want to wear. So first I'm thinking like, okay, I think it has to be rib. And my reason for that is like, and I admit this is like a prejudice of mine, I don't love it when I see like a whole bunch of needle sizes listed on a pattern. Like, I really would like to just pick up my needles and go. I don't want to think about like, oh, I need my interchangeables or I'm going to need to go shopping for needles. So I was like, I want it to be on one needle. And that's where I came up with rib, because often when you're changing needle size, it's because you're trying to make your rib smaller, right? Like you want your little rib to be nice and tight so it pulls your sweater in, and then you switch to a larger needle for the rest of the sweater. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. This sweater, one needle size. So I came up with like the 4x4 rib. This is the Fourscore here. I'm going to talk more about it specifically when I get into the design details, but you can see that it's the 4x4 rib. I'm like, that's cool. And what's nice about a rib too is that like it's got some cling. So then, you get these really straight shapings, which I know it's super hot right now to do these sort of boxy sweaters. When I first started knitting, it was all about waist shaping, and now it's like straight. So cool, great. But the rib at least like lets it cling in a little bit, so even without having to do lots of shaping in the waist, you're going to get some sort of like cling. Same with the arms, right? Like if you're not perfect on your size, it's still going to like at least sort of stick to you a little bit. But it's 4x4, not 2x2, so it's not as clingy as some ribs. This is a lot of information about rib. Anyway, so I came up with that, but then I'm like, okay, you still have to deal with the fact that there's this neck shaping. And I had this like memory of the first few sweaters I made where I came up against neck shaping. Like, you cast off stitches in the center and then do some decreases and then up to the shoulder. And sometimes there'd be like some shaping on the shoulder too, like to get a, like an angle like this. And that was not obvious. Like, I think the way that people tend to write knitting patterns, unless it's like very specifically to teach you that skill, sort of assumes that it's all going to make sense to you. And once it's done, it does make sense. But while you're doing it, you're like, what on earth is going on? It's sort of like sock heels that way, where you're like, what the F is this? And then you sew it all up and you're like, oh, yeah, okay. It's like, it makes sense. But so I really wanted to do something where none of that came into play. So that's when I came up with the idea of like a funnel neck. That just like, there would be no cast off. It would just kind of be more like a turtleneck and hopefully just like hang out there and work. So that was quite a bit of work, actually. Like the first few times that I knit it, and boy, I knit it a few times, I sort of miscalculated on that. I did like a raglan sleeve, and I had left like a little shoulder, a saddle shoulder that came up into the neck, but it was too wide. It looked kind of cool, but it was definitely too wide. It was sitting way out here, and I hate that especially when you see like modeled pictures and the model has like beautiful flowing hair that doesn't reveal that in fact there's like a 2-inch gap around her neck. Like, not cool, not comfortable, and thin-haired ladies like myself don't have the hair to cover that up. So I reworked it in a way that the sleeve actually decreases out into nothing, and so the neck is actually like the front and the back are joined up. So here I'm going to pull this forward and hopefully it's going to work and I can show you a little bit. So you can see here that like this is where the sleeve sort of disappears into a point, and now this is the back, the front and the back are joined up here with a seam. So it's pretty, it's good. Like it actually suits, and the neck is, it's not too high. Like it's just, I made it, and I played with that quite a bit too. Like how high can I make it before it starts to fall down? You know, that thing where like turtlenecks spill over. So I think I got the right mix there in that it sits where you want it to sit, and doesn't flop over, but it's high enough that it doesn't feel unfinished. And in this case too, the other thing I was like, I just want the directions to be simple and relatively short, easy to do. So front and back have to be the same, and the 2 sleeves are obviously the same. So really, if you're knitting this pattern, you only have 2 pieces you have to work on. The front / back and the 2 sleeves. So that's another reason I called it Fourscore. Like, I'm so witty. It's 4x4 rib and it's 4 pieces. And that's it. So you knit your 4 pieces, and then, I mean, this is really the one thing that you can't avoid. With all these like different techniques that I didn't want to put in it, by knitting it flat, I have to have seaming. You have to sew it up. But here's my theory. I didn't really learn to properly seam my knits until quite recently, like embarrassingly recently. And I think that was a mistake. Like it gives you so much power to be able to finish your knits properly. So I have a link in the pattern to a really good tutorial on mattress stitch, which is basically an invisible stitch for knitwear. And that's what's used here. And you can see, like, it is invisible. That's a seam. Is it? No, sorry. This is the seam over here. See? It's so invisible I can't even see it. So this is the seam here between the sleeve and the body. And it just disappears. And obviously there's a fair amount of it because it's got like a quite generous length. And obviously the sleeve has to be seamed as well. So when you finish knitting up the sweater and you're super excited because you're like, I knit a sweater, I did it, you still have a couple of hours of work to do, I'm afraid. Yeah, seaming takes some time, especially when you're new at it. You get faster as you go, but it's worth taking the time to do it and just sort of accepting that, like, yeah, just because you finished casting off all your stuff, it doesn't mean you're finished. You still have some work to do, and obviously blocking and all of that, which maybe I'll talk about blocking more in another episode. So yeah, that is the Fourscore sweater, and I believe in it. I think it is a great first sweater. And one of the things I'm trying to do with this podcast a little bit is, instead of doing it about the pattern I've just released, is looking back at a pattern that I released a little while ago, because it gives me some time to read feedback from people who are knitting it, but also to have like worn the sweater and have some sense of how it wears. So a few pieces of feedback I've got on this is one that it's tough to get my gauge. So I am a loose knitter, dudes, like loose, especially I find especially when it comes to row gauge that my gauge will be looser, although in this case not so much. So the gauge for this sweater is 4 stitches per inch and like 6.5 rows per inch, which comes out to 16 stitches over 10 centimeters and 26 stitches rows per inch. So I use Drops Air, which is a worsted weight, but my advice is, if you are trying to get my gauge and failing, even if you're going up a needle size, I think I did this on a 4.5, you're going to a 5, you're going to a 5.5, still not getting gauge, try a different yarn. Try a more of an Aran weight yarn or something like that. Like, because often in patterns they'll say, use the needles that get you gauge. If that's not possible, you can also change your yarn weight. The key thing is that to make it fit the way you want it, you have to get the same number of stitches per inch and rows per inch. Rows per inch can be sometimes a little bit more flexible because a pattern may say knit until it measures 13 inches or something. So if you get to 13 inches with a different number of rows, often that's cool. Although with something like this, a raglan shaping where it's made over a certain distance, sometimes that can really screw you up. You end up with an armhole that's down here or way up here. So do consider changing yarns if the needle thing isn't working out. So that's one piece of feedback that I've gotten. The other thing that I've gotten a lot is that, which doesn't happen to me too much anymore, and I think it's because I'm a continental knitter, is like a loose stitch when you do ribbing. So if you've done ribbing before and you've noticed that sort of the place where you change from your knit stitch to your purl stitch looks like a run almost, that's what I'm talking about. And there's a few different ways to fix that up. There's knitting through the back loop, there's just moving your yarn around. So I actually already filmed a little tutorial about that that I posted to help people with this, and I'm gonna cut that in at the end of this podcast if you're interested. And you can also find it on my YouTube channel if for some reason I can't figure out my video editing enough to plug that in at the end. But that's my hope, is that you'll just get to the end and then you'll see it. So the yarn that I knit this in is called Drops Air, and it's like a chain stitch underneath. So we call it like a blown yarn. So there's like a chain base and then a bunch of fibers blown into it, and that's what holds it in place. And it's super soft, and the name is definitely great because it is so light for such a big sweater. This thing is light. Like you feel like you just throw it on and it's easy. But I will say that over the months that I've owned the sweater and that I've worn the sweater, I do notice that it doesn't hold its shape super well. After a day of wearing it, like sometimes with your old jeans, like you're wearing your jeans and when you stand up, it's like you can see the knee is still there. You're still bent, or like pockets still have like your wallet imprint. This yarn has a little bit of that quality where you've been bending your elbows, the elbows sagging a little bit, which, is not such a big deal. A little bit of steam often is enough to like bring it back into shape. But I think it feels big to me. I just remeasured the gauge to see, has it changed since I first blocked it and wrote up the pattern. I'd say a tiny bit. Like I would still call this 4 stitches per inch, but it's just on the edge of sort of being 3.8 stitches per inch. And as far as the row gauge goes, like I can, in some places it's measuring more like 24 rows over 10 centimeters, not 26. So, and I think, that's gravity too. Like keep that in mind. Like as your knits hang on you, like they're gonna stretch out unless they're very specific yarns or stitch patterns. So all that to say, I do love this yarn. I would definitely consider working with this yarn again, but I might do it on a smaller needle to try and hold some of that shape. I mean, this is definitely a lovely fabric that feels like it's really got a nice drape to it at this gauge. But if I was making myself another Fourscore in Drops Air, I might try a smaller needle. Or I might try using like a plied worsted instead of a blown one to see if that would like grip it a little bit more. So yeah, that's the Fourscore, and it's quite generous in its length and generous in its sleeves. I knew I was going to ask my friend, I knew I was going to ask my friend Jen to model it, and she's a tall, slim lady with a very long arm, so I knit a little bit of extra length into mine, knowing that I was going to ask her to do the pictures for me. So maybe I'll flash up a photo of that right now. Yeah, so, don't be scared, even as a first-time knitter, or first-time sweater knitter, a newer knitter, don't be scared to make some basic modifications. Length of the sleeves, the length of the actual sweater itself. This is really easy stuff to change. You just have to be aware that it's going to change your yardage requirements. I would say in general, ask your LYS or ask wherever you're getting your yarn about their return policy, and buy that extra skein or ball of yarn. And if you don't use it, you can always exchange it for something else. At Espace Tricot, our policy is that you can get store credit or an exchange. So I like to think of it as like you always have a certain amount of money just invested in yarn, but it's somewhat liquid. It can be, it can be changed into other yarn as long as you meet the 90-day policy, which I have a fair amount of my money invested in yarn. It's that Carrie Bradshaw line. I like my yarn. I like my money where I can see it in my closet. I like mine in my yarn. So yeah, that's the Fourscore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a discount on this pattern for all of you podcast watchers. If this has been convincing and now you think you want to buy the pattern, you can go to my Ravelry store. So you go to Ravelry, look for Stephanie Earp or look up Fourscore, put it in your cart and put in the code First Podcast. So FIRSTPODCAST, all one word, all caps, and you can get 15% off, and I'm going to keep that going for 1 week from the day this podcast is posted. So if you look down where it says the day it was posted, if it's within 1 week, you can get the discount on the pattern. And of course, let me know if you need some pattern support, if you need some guidance when you're working on it. I really actually I like answering those messages, whether it's on Rav or by email. I have like a contact form on my website at stephanieearp.com. And I'll definitely do my very best to help you out. So that's that. But I also wanted to, I'm thinking about segments. Like I'm trying to plan what's my podcast going to be like. So I thought I'd wear an old knit and talk about something I knit a long time ago. So I am wearing a Michael Kors design that was in Vogue knitting in 2005. It was like the holiday issue of 2005, and I knit it in 2009. So, oh my God, that's like, almost 10 years ago. That's kind of crazy. So I think love this pattern when I saw it in the magazine. I'll give you a little bit preview here. It's like a little tee. It's got some sort of weird shaping here that I'll talk about in a second. Really lovely cabling. And I knit this in Zara by Filatura de Croza. And it was definitely sailed in yarn. Like I would never, ever have chosen this color on purpose, but it was like, there was a sweater quantity sitting in a sale bin. And I thought, yeah, I'll do it. And actually, I like it. I like this color. And obviously, it's a knit I still have, which I don't know where my knits go. Like when I look back at my Ravelry project page, I'm like, I haven't seen that in like 6 years. But this one is stuck around. And I'm constantly pulling it out and putting it on and then deciding that it makes me look sort of like I'm wearing shoulder pads that fell down. You know what I'm saying? Like as if there's something in here, like a squirrel. I'm storing nuts for the winter. And that's because it has this really interesting thing where it's like you do this rib and then you do this massive increase right here. And I think it's supposed to like give a puff sleeve sort of effect. Also, it does really have a puff sleeve. Like it's quite big in the set-in sleeve where it's put in. So it's like, I think about reknitting this all the time and like maybe making some adjustments to the sleeves because I do really I think it's super flattering. And as I mentioned in my Ravelry notes when I posted this, it gives you a bust. Like if you don't have a lot going on here, for some reason this shape does nice things. I mean, I'm at 35 with a decent bra on. So like there's not a lot here. It's like a B cup if I'm generous. It's like saying I'm 5'4" instead of 5'3.5". I'm a B cup. So yeah, I like that. I think it's nice that it gives me a little shape, but obviously these sleeves are a bit funky. And yeah, and also like it's supposed to be an Aran weight sweater. It's like in a holiday issue, so we're gonna say winter. And it's got little tiny short sleeves, which is not the most practical thing, but I guess if you're Michael Kors, you can get away with whatever. So I think if I was knitting this again, I would definitely try to do an adjustment for a long sleeve. I think about stealing this basic pattern all the time, where it's just like, I love the shape of this body, and I've often thought I should go and look at the way that it's done because it's really lovely. But it has waist shaping. You can see that it's an older pattern because it's got that waist shaping in it, which is, like I said, not the thing right now. But this, like that same thing that's in the sleeve is here, and so it's like it wants to give you a little pouchy pouch there, and I don't know if that's really what most women are looking for in a sweater. Like, oh look, this is where the skin I had around my baby is. You know, is that cool? Do we want that? But the reason I wanted to wear this one today is to talk about seaming, right? So I'm like, dude, learn how to seam now. Don't wait. Do it at the beginning. Because this thing is a mess. Like, check that out. Can you see how awful these seams are? Good Lord. Now, I mean, granted, sewing up seams with like bobble stitches and stuff, it's not easy. But I basically sort of used like an overcast stitch from hand sewing. Like that's what I was able to do. Is seam it up. Okay, I'm going to turn it inside out and seam it up. And like, you know, it's just not good, yo. Look at that. Yikes. I sometimes think about taking this all apart and reseaming it now that I know what I'm doing, but frankly, I'm fairly lazy, so it's probably not going to happen. But I don't know. I just wanted to show you, like, it's, you know, if you don't do a nice job seaming your knits, doesn't mean you can't wear them. I wear this. You know, people say, oh my God, I love that sweater. Did you make it? And I still say, like, yeah, I made this. Check it out. Look how talented I am. I'm amazing. So just, you know, no one's actually going to be like, oh, like, that's a mess, yo. Like, what are you doing? That's awful. No one's going to say that. But the satisfaction of knowing that having done all this work and then you finish it up and it actually looks good, it is worth the investment in learning how to do match stitch, which is not hard. Like, this is what's crazy to me, is that I avoided this thing like the plague for years, like decades, because I thought, I don't want to learn this. And it's not difficult. Like, I know how to do way more difficult things than that. Crazy color work, cabling without a needle, Estonian lace and twined knitting, like all this stuff that I invested the time in learning and didn't, for some reason, think that that was important, and I have no idea what I was thinking. I guess maybe it's sort of like a low return on the time spent. So if someone's like, oh, what did you do this weekend? And if you're like, oh, I taught myself how to do Fair Isle stranded knitting and check it out, you're like, yeah, I did something. If you were to say, oh, I learned how to sew up my knits properly, look at this seam, people would be like, yeah, that's called a seam. I buy clothes from the store all the time that look like that. But there you go. It's worth it. Do it. So then the other thing that I thought I would do as like a little a segment is what I'm knitting. So I am knitting right now the Sipila sweater by Caitlin Hunter of Boylan Knitworks, me and 80,000 other people. It's a really beautiful colorwork yoke sweater. So this is my yoke so far. It's almost done. I think I have like a few more inches or a few more rows, rounds of the yoke to do. This is it. I'm using Madeline Tosh Merino Light, which is one of my favorite yarns. I'm a Toshaholic for sure. I don't know what the name of this darker color is. I was wound up in my stash. I suspect it doesn't exist anymore because I couldn't find anything like it in the store at Espace. But it's sort of a gray with a very little tiny bit of a green undertone. And then it looks like this in the ball. And then my main color, the lighter color, is called Killing Me Softly. Looks like this. So it's like a speckle with a neutral base. It's very conservative for me. I don't usually, look at this. I don't usually like to do this. But it's got some like cool pink speckles in it and some blues. And I think I'm going to love it. But it definitely, Caitlin's stuff, from what I've seen, it's my first time knitting her stuff. She likes to do quite a bit of ease in the bust, but not as much in the arm. And that's fine, but I have like broad shoulders and a bit bigger arms for my size, so I think I'm going to have to make a few little adjustments, and I've seen some projects on Ravelry where people have done that, so I'm going to study their notes and see if that can save me some math time. And I think I'll probably also add some waist shaping to it. It's really quite big through here, and I don't have enough yarn to make it that big, so I'm like, sometimes your mods are because you want it to fit a certain way, and sometimes your mods are because you don't want to buy another skein of yarn. So that's what I'm knitting. It'll probably take me a while to finish. I don't know that I'm going to have an update on that anytime soon, because when you're trying to design and get like a pattern out a month, basically, sort of as an average, a lot of your knitting time is spent designing, especially because I still find, at least at this point, that I have to knit my designs a couple of times to kind of get it right. There's a lot of first drafts and second drafts, or then some ripping and redoing. So what might take, hopefully you, if you buy the pattern, knit it, a couple weeks or 3 weeks to knit, that might take me double that time because I'm working it all out. And then finally, as sort of my last segment, gosh, I feel like this is short. Is this short? My camera says that I've been talking for 28 minutes, which seems like such a long time. But I feel like knitting podcasts go on and on because you're like knitting and looking at pictures. Anyway, I guess I'll work on that. And see if I can add more or talk more slowly. I don't know. I mean, I'll add the ribbing thing at the end. That'll add a few minutes. So anyways, a little pattern preview. This is what I'm working on now. It's called the Sweet Vicious. It's actually a tank and a cowl. So this is the cowl. Just to show you like this super cool stitch pattern, which is either like a smock stitch or it's a slip stitch. I don't know. I was asking actually in a forum on Ravelry if anyone had any idea what kind of stitch this is, like what group of stitches it would fall into. Like if you're flipping through your stitch dictionary, what heading would this fall under? And a really interesting sort of like debate broke out. So basically the answer is none, which is cool. It's kind of cool to feel like you invented something. So I'll throw this on. I'll take my hair out so I don't snag it. So yeah, it's just like a little cowl. Like I've said, there's a tank version of it too, but it's just easier to show you the cowl because I can put it on without having to get changed. So I'm going to show you that. And this worked in a mohair lace in the background and a fingering weight in the front. So anyway, you'll see more about that. I'm hoping to release it on July 3rd, 2018. That's the goal. And my thought is that how I'll do it is that if you buy the tank pattern, you get the cowl pattern for free. But if you just want the cowl pattern, I'll have that available as at like sort of a little bit of a lower price, because this was a bit of an intense design, and especially the tank. So that will be one price, but you get this as a bonus, and then this guy on its own would be a little bit cheaper. I haven't totally decided what the pricing is yet. So yeah, look for that on July 3rd, and my hashtag for it is going to be Sweet Vicious Knit, and I'll talk about it more probably 6 months from now when I'm doing the podcast about making that design. So hey, thank you so much for tuning in to my my first podcast. I hope it went well. I feel like it went well. I guess I'll find out when I'm staring at this for hours trying to edit it and put in pretty titles, and I'll be thinking about like every tiny weird expression that I made and how many times I said yo. Like I said yo a lot, right? It's funny how that happens when you're like talking to a camera and you suddenly start like falling into weird speech patterns. I promise to work on it. So thank you again. My name is Stephanie Earp. My website is stephanieearp.com. My Ravelry username is One and Only Steph. My designer profile in Ravelry you can find by putting in Stephanie Earp, E-A-R-P, like Wyatt. I'm on Instagram as Stephanie Earple. You just do my name, then add the L-E at the end. And also on Twitter, which I don't really use very much, but if you're interested in hearing me complain about parenting, that's where I do that. So thanks again. Check out the ribbing tutorial that's coming up, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Thanks for watching. Hi, this is Stephanie, and this is a quick little video tutorial on dealing with loose stitches in a rib. I have been getting this question a little bit since I released my Fourscore pattern, which uses a 4x4 rib throughout. And it's super easy, super flattering thing, but not so great if you've got columns of loose stitches happening. So here are two ways that you can deal with that. So as you can see, I'm starting out over here with a column of purl stitches. And these ones I don't have to worry about because they're at the beginning of my round or my row. And then I come to my knits. And often this is the stitch where people have issues, the first purl stitch after the column of knits. So I'm going to go ahead and purl this, and I know the temptation is to tug right here and try and tighten up your tension here. But what that often does is actually distort your knit stitch and this purl stitch, and it doesn't really solve the problem. You're better off coming into that second stitch, purling, and then tugging. And in fact, what I like even better than that is move your yarn to the back and give it a little tug, and then to the front and give a little tug. And I love this idea because, you know, it's a really simple thing to add to your knitting, and if it works for you, it's a solution that doesn't really require too much thinking. But if you find that that's not enough, here is another possibility. So once again, I have my 4 purls over here, no problem. Come around and do my 4 knit stitches. And here, when I come into this purl stitch, instead of wrapping my yarn up and around as I usually would, I'm going to wrap my yarn the opposite way. So just you can see that one more time. I'm going sort of under and over. So I'm wrapping it the opposite way. And what this will do is create a twisted stitch. And really it just uses a little bit less yarn, which is what we're looking for here. But now when I turn my work, as I work along, come to my knits, 1, 2, 3, these were my purls on the other side. I get to this one and it's twisted. Just to show you very clearly the difference between those two stitches, you can see that on this stitch, which has been normally, or purled normally on the other side, the front leg is the right leg. Over here, the front leg is the left leg. So I can knit this one normally, but this one I'm going to knit through the back loop to correct my twist. And that is a very effective solution for getting rid of those long, loose purl stitches, but it does require a little bit more thinking because you need to remember that you need to do that on the last knit on your wrong sides. In fact, on the last knit on both sides, because you would use this technique on both sides of your work. If you were good at reading your knitting and seeing that twisted leg, it's no problem and you get into the rhythm of it. But if the sort of gentle tug on the second purl stitch is enough for you, that's a great solution too. So I hope this helps.